The jagged lightning split the dark Montana sky as Yancey Irons spurred his horse through the driving rain, the right side of his face burning like hellfire despite the cool deluge. It was 1879, and the scar that ran from his temple to his jawline felt like it was tearing open afresh with each flash of lightning that illuminated the rolling plains ahead. He pulled his hat lower, knowing that hiding his face was useless in this downpour, but the habit was as ingrained as the twisted tissue that marked him forever. Fort Kearny, Nebraska territory, was still a day's ride away, but Yancey couldn't push his stallion any harder through this storm. He'd have to find shelter soon. The abandoned homestead he spotted through the curtain of rain was as good as it would get tonight. As he dismounted, the wind whipped his duster around his legs, and he felt the familiar sting of shame when he imagined whoever owned this place seeing his face in the morning. 7 years since the cattle stampede that had nearly killed him, and he still couldn't look at himself in a mirror without turning away. The barn door hung half off its hinges, but it would provide enough shelter for the night. Yancey led his horse inside, the animals breathing loud in the relative quiet. He was surprised to see a small lantern already flickering in the corner. "Who's there?" A woman's voice, steady despite the edge of fear. Yancey kept his face turned away instinctively. "Just looking for shelter from the storm, madam. Didn't mean to intrude." He heard her footsteps approaching cautiously. "You're welcome to stay until the rain passes. I'm Josephine Dawson. Most folks call me Josie." "Yancey Irons," he replied, still not turning fully toward her. "I'll be gone by first light." "There's no need for that," she said, stepping closer. "You can turn around, Mr. Irons. I don't bite." Reluctantly, he turned to face her, keeping his right side in shadow as best he could. The lantern cast enough light for him to see her clearly honey-blonde hair tied back in a practical braid, intelligent eyes that looked more curious than frightened, and a simple traveling dress that was as wet as his own clothes. "You're heading to Fort Kearny?" she asked, noting his trail gear. "Yes, madam. Got business there." Josie moved to tend to her own horse, a dappled mare tied at the other end of the barn. "What a coincidence. I'm headed there myself. My father was stationed there before he passed. I've inherited his home but haven't seen it yet." Yancey nodded, keeping conversation to a minimum as he unsaddled his horse. He was painfully aware of how the lantern light caught his scar whenever he turned a certain way, and how she must be staring at it when his back was turned. "Would you care for some coffee?" she asked, gesturing to a small pot near the lantern. "It's not much, but it's hot." "Thank you," he said gruffly, accepting a tin cup but positioning himself so the damaged side of his face was in shadow. "You don't need to do that, you know," Josie said matter-of-factly. "Do what?" He replied, though he knew perfectly well what she meant. "Hide your face." Her directness caught him off guard. "I noticed your scar when you first came in. It doesn't frighten me." Yancey felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Most folks aren't so comfortable with it." "Most folks haven't seen what I've seen," she replied simply. "I was a nurse during the war." The Civil War had ended 14 years ago, which meant she was older than he'd first thought, probably near 30 to his 32 years, though she carried it well. "War leaves different kinds of scars," he acknowledged, allowing himself to face her more directly. "Yes, it does." She settled onto a hay bale across from him. "How did you get yours, if you don't mind my asking?" He did mind, but something in her straightforward manner made him answer anyway. "Cattle stampede, 7 years back. I was working a drive from Texas. Something spooked the herd and I got caught trying to turn them. Horse went down and a steer's horn caught me." He traced the jagged line unconsciously. "Doctor said I was lucky to keep my eye." "That's quite a story of survival," Josie said, studying him with interest rather than pity, which was somehow worse. He didn't want to be interesting because of his disfigurement. "Don't feel lucky most days," he muttered. "And yet you are," she replied. "That scar is proof you survived." Yancey nearly choked on his coffee. No one had ever put it that way before. Most people either stared openly or deliberately avoided looking at him altogether. No one had ever suggested his scar was something positive. "Never thought of it that way," he admitted. "Perhaps you should," Josie said with a small smile. "Now, since it appears we're traveling to the same destination, would you consider riding together tomorrow? The plains can be dangerous for a woman alone." Yancey hesitated. He preferred solitude, had grown accustomed to it since the accident. People stared less when you kept to yourself, but there was something about Josephine Dawson that intrigued him, her lack of fear, her straight talk. "I ride at dawn," he said finally. "If you're ready, you're welcome to join me." "I'll be ready," she promised. They settled into an almost comfortable silence as the rain drummed against the barn roof. For the first time in years, Yancey didn't constantly think about positioning himself to hide his scar. Something in Josie's acceptance had momentarily lifted that burden, though he didn't dare hope it would last. Morning came with clear skies, and the fresh scent of rain washed earth. True to her word, Josie was ready to ride at first light, her few possessions packed neatly on her mare. They set out across the Nebraska plains together, the rising sun warming their backs. Yancey found himself watching Josie as they rode. She sat her horse well, with the confidence of someone who'd spent plenty of time in the saddle. When she caught him looking, he didn't avert his gaze as he might have once done. "You ride like you were born to it," he remarked. "My father was a cavalry officer," she explained. "He taught me when I was barely old enough to reach the stirrups. Said a woman should know how to ride properly, especially out west. Wise man." "He was," she agreed, a flicker of sadness crossing her features. "He died last winter, pneumonia. I was in Philadelphia at the time, working at a hospital. Couldn't get to him in time to say goodbye." "I'm sorry," Yancey said, meaning it. "Thank you." Josie straightened in her saddle. "I've never been to Fort Kearny before. Father was stationed there for years, but I never had the chance to visit. He bought property nearby when he retired from the Army. Now it's mine, though I'm not entirely sure what I'll do with it." "It's good country," Yancey offered. "Good for cattle if you've got the means to start a herd." "And what's your business there, Mr. Irons?" "Yancey," he corrected. "I'm meeting a man about a job." "Cattle drive heading north to Montana Territory." "You're still working cattle drives even after your accident," he nodded. "It's what I know. Been doing it since I was 16. "That takes courage," Josie observed. Yancey shrugged uncomfortably. "Just work." They rode in companionable silence for a while before Josie spoke again. "Have you ever thought of settling down? Having your own ranch instead of driving someone else's cattle?" The question hit closer to home than she could know. Before the accident, he'd been saving for his own spread, dreaming of building something that would last. After, he'd abandoned those dreams, figuring no woman would want to wake up next to his face for the rest of her life. "Used to think about it," he admitted. "Not so much anymore." "Because of the scar?" Her directness still startled him. "Partly," he acknowledged, surprising himself with his honesty. "Hard to make plans when most folks can't look you in the eye." "I'm looking you in the eye right now, Yancey Irons," she said, pulling her horse alongside his. "And I see a man, not a scar." Something shifted in his chest at her words. He'd spent so long defining himself by his disfigurement that he'd forgotten who he was beneath it. Their journey continued through the day, stopping briefly to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack. Josie asked about his life before the accident, and Yancey found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her about growing up in Missouri. His first cattle drive at 16, the mentors who taught him the trade. In turn, she told him about her childhood following her father from one army post to another, her decision to train as a nurse, and the horrors and heartbreak of tending wounded soldiers during the war. "Is that why you spoke so plainly about my scar?" he asked. "Because you've seen worse." "I've seen men with far more grievous injuries," she acknowledged. "But it's not about comparison. It's about seeing the person, not just their wounds." She paused, looking thoughtful. "During the war, I noticed something. The men who survived terrible injuries often felt shame about their scars, as if they'd done something wrong by not dying whole. But I always thought those scars were badges of honor, proof they'd fought and survived." By mid-afternoon, they spotted the first signs of Fort Kearny in the distance. The fort had been officially abandoned by the military years ago, but the settlement around it had continued to grow, serving as an important stop along the Oregon Trail and the Union Pacific Railroad. "We should reach town by evening," Yancey said, noting the position of the sun. Josie nodded, a hint of nervousness showing for the first time. "I'm not sure what I'll find when we get there. Father's letters describe the property, but I've never seen it myself." "Where is it located?" "About 3 miles northwest of the fort, according to his papers." He called it Dawson Creek Ranch, though I'm not sure how grand it actually is. Yancey knew the place. "It's a good piece of land. Creek runs year-round, even in drought. Good pasture. House needs work last I saw, but it's solid." Her face brightened. "You know it, passed by it on drives. Your father bought it from old Hank Thornton about 5 years back, if I recall. Good man, your father. Always fair with trail hands passing through." "That sounds like him," she said softly. "He wrote that he was making improvements to the place. Said someday it would be a legacy for me, though I told him I was happy with my life in Philadelphia. And now," she looked out across the plains, considering, "now I'm not sure. I came to see the property and decide whether to sell it, but there's something about this country." I can see why he loved it. They rode into Fort Kearny as the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon. The town bustled with activity, freight wagons loading supplies, cowboys fresh off the trail spending their pay in saloons, settlers heading west stopping for provisions. The main street was lined with businesses: general store, blacksmith, 2 saloons, a small hotel, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. Yancey was acutely aware of the stares as they rode down the main street. He was used to it for himself, but now people were looking curiously at Josie too, a respectable-looking woman riding alongside the scarred cowboy. He instinctively adjusted his hat lower over the right side of his face. "Don't," Josie said quietly. "You have nothing to hide." He didn't respond, but he straightened slightly in the saddle. "Where will you be staying?" he asked as they approached the center of town. "I thought I might go directly to the property. It's still early enough." Yancey frowned. "You don't know what condition it's in. Might be better to stay in town tonight, head out there tomorrow with supplies." She considered this. "That's sensible. Is the hotel decent?" "Decent enough." He nodded toward a 2-story building with a sign reading Kearny House. "The owner's wife keeps it clean." They stopped in front of the hotel, and Yancey dismounted first, coming around to help Josie down. It was the first time they'd touched, his hands at her waist as he lifted her from the saddle. Something passed between them, a current of awareness that left him momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she said, her voice slightly breathless. He cleared his throat. "I'll see to your horse and bags." "You don't need to, I insist," he said firmly. After securing her a room, Yancey carried her bags upstairs. The hotel wasn't fancy, but it was clean and respectable. "What about you?" she asked as he set her bags down. "Where will you stay?" I usually bunk at the livery when I'm in town. Sam Winters runs it, known him for years. Josie frowned. That hardly seems comfortable. Why don't you take a room here? Yancey shifted uncomfortably. I prefer to keep to myself in towns. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Because of how people react to your scar. He didn't deny it. People in saloons get brave with whiskey in them. Comments turn to fists. Easier to avoid it. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked, and he was surprised by how much he wanted her to. If you'd like. I can help you get out to your property, make sure everything's secure before I meet my contact about that cattle drive. I would appreciate that very much. She smiled, and something in Yancey's chest tightened pleasantly. I'll meet you for breakfast then. 7 o'clock. 7 it is. Yancey tipped his hat and turned to leave, feeling strangely reluctant to part from her company. Yancey, she called after him. When he turned back, she said, Thank you for riding with me today. I enjoyed your company. The pleasure was mine, Miss Dawson. Josie, please, she corrected with a smile. Josie, he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his lips. Until tomorrow. He made his way to the livery, his mind filled with thoughts of honey blonde hair and kind eyes that didn't flinch from his scars. Sam Winters greeted him with a hearty handshake and offered him the usual spot in the loft to bed down. Saw you riding in with that lady, Sam remarked as they tended to the horses. New in town, is she? Colonel Dawson's daughter, Yancey explained. Come to see about her father's property. Sam nodded in recognition. The colonel was a good man, sorry to hear of his passing. So she's planning to stay, don't know. Says she came to decide whether to sell. Be a shame if she did. That's good land. Sam gave him a sidelong look. Though I reckon some might be interested in buying if she's selling. Yancey knew Sam was fishing, wondering if he might be interested himself. Once, perhaps, but he'd long since given up such dreams. After settling his horse, Yancey headed to the general store to purchase supplies for tomorrow's ride out to the Dawson property. He kept his head down, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed him. The storekeeper, Martha Jenkins, was one of the few people in town who treated him normally. Yancey Irons, as I live and breathe, she greeted him warmly. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Just passing through, Mrs. Jenkins. Meeting Hollister about that Montana drive. Well, you're looking well. Need supplies, he nodded, listing off what he needed: coffee, flour, bacon, beans, and other essentials for a day's ride. As Martha gathered the items, the bell over the door jingled and Josie walked in. Mr. Irons, she said, sounding pleased to see him. I had the same thought about supplies. Miss Dawson, he greeted her, aware of Martha's curious gaze darting between them. You must be Colonel Dawson's daughter, Martha said, extending her hand. I'm Martha Jenkins. Your father was a regular customer, God rest his soul. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Jenkins. Yes, I've come to see about father's property. It's a fine piece of land, Martha said approvingly. The colonel spoke of you often. Very proud of your nursing work, he was. Josie smiled sadly. He wanted me to visit, but my duties at the hospital always seemed to get in the way. Now I wish I'd made the time. Martha patted her hand sympathetically. He understood, dear. He was planning to visit you this spring, had it all arranged. This was clearly news to Josie, whose eyes filled with tears. I didn't know that. He mentioned it the last time he was in, just before winter set in. Martha glanced at Yancey. Mr. Irons helping you get settled. Yes, he's been kind enough to offer his assistance in visiting the property tomorrow. Martha's eyebrows rose slightly, but she merely said, You couldn't ask for a better guide. Yancey knows this country as well as anyone. They finished their purchases, and Yancey insisted on carrying Josie's supplies back to the hotel. As they walked, he noticed several townspeople watching them with undisguised curiosity. People are staring, Josie observed quietly. At me, Yancey clarified. They're wondering what a lady like you is doing with someone like me. Someone like you, she repeated, a dangerous edge to her voice. You mean a decent, honorable man who's gone out of his way to help a stranger? Her fierce defense surprised and touched him. That's not what they see. Then they're fools, she said firmly. At the hotel they parted again, agreeing to meet for breakfast. Yancey returned to the livery where Sam had prepared a simple supper. Mighty protective of the colonel's daughter, Sam commented as they ate. Just being neighborly, Yancey replied, not meeting his friend's knowing gaze. Uh-huh, Sam said skeptically. And I'm the Queen of England. She's different, Sam, Yancey admitted after a moment. Doesn't seem bothered by. He gestured vaguely to his scarred face. About time you found someone who sees past it, Sam said. The rest of us have been trying to tell you for years that it's not as bad as you think. Easy for you to say. No, it ain't easy. It's been hard watching you hide yourself away these past 7 years. You were never like this before, Yancey. You had plans, ambitions. Things change, Yancey said shortly, not wanting to continue this conversation. Sam sighed but dropped the subject. Hollister's supposed to be in town tomorrow. You still planning to sign on for that Montana drive? That's the plan. Even if the colonel's daughter might be selling her land, Sam asked innocently. Yancey shot him a warning look. Don't start, Sam. But as he lay in the loft that night, staring up at the rafters, Yancey couldn't help but wonder what might have been if he'd met Josie Dawson before the accident. Would he have had the courage to court her properly? Or would he have assumed she was out of his reach, even then the educated daughter of an army officer, while he was just a cowhand with calloused hands and dirt under his fingernails? It didn't matter. She'd be selling the property and returning to Philadelphia, and he'd be heading to Montana with Hollister's herd. Their paths had crossed briefly, nothing more. Yet despite this rational assessment, Yancey found himself looking forward to morning with an eagerness he hadn't felt in years. Breakfast at the hotel's small dining room was better than Yancey expected. He'd arrived early, washing up as best he could at the livery and putting on his cleanest shirt. He still felt rough around the edges compared to the other diners, but he straightened his shoulders and walked in, refusing to duck his head as he usually did. Josie was already seated at a corner table, looking fresh and lovely in a simple blue dress. Her face brightened when she saw him and she waved him over. "Good morning," she greeted him warmly. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he replied, taking the seat across from her. "And you?" The bed was surprisingly comfortable. "I'm eager to see the property today." They ordered breakfast eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee and discussed their plans for the day. "I thought we'd ride out to the ranch, see what condition it's in, then decide what supplies you'll need if you're planning to stay there," Yancey explained. "That sounds perfect. I have my father's deed and some of his correspondence about the property, but I'm not entirely sure what to expect." Their food arrived, brought by a young waitress who openly stared at Yancey's scar until Josie fixed her with such a stern look that the girl blushed and hurried away. "You don't need to do that," Yancey said quietly. "Do what? Defend me? I'm used to the staring." "You shouldn't have to be," Josie replied firmly. "It's rude and unkind. People are curious by nature. Curiosity doesn't excuse bad manners." She took a bite of her eggs. "Besides, I meant what I said yesterday. That scar is proof you survived something that might have killed a lesser man. There's no shame in that." Yancey had no response to that. No one had ever put it quite that way before. After breakfast, they collected their horses and supplies and set out for the Dawson property. The morning was clear and cool, perfect riding weather. As they left town behind, Yancey felt the familiar sense of relief he always experienced in open country, away from curious stares and whispered comments. "You seem more relaxed," Josie observed as they rode. "I prefer open spaces," he admitted. "Less people." "Because of how they react to your scar," he nodded. "Partly, but I've always preferred the country to towns, even before the accident, you mean?" "Yes." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hooves against the packed earth soothing. Yancey found himself stealing glances at Josie, admiring the way the morning sun caught in her hair, the confident set of her shoulders as she rode. "Tell me about the cattle business," she said after a time. "Father mentioned it in his letters, but I know very little about it." Yancey was surprised by her interest, but began explaining the basics: how the industry had grown after the Civil War, the long drives from Texas to railheads in Kansas, and more recently to stock the northern ranges in Wyoming and Montana territories. "It's changing, though," he concluded. "Railroads are pushing further south and west. Days of the long drives are numbered, I suspect." "Is that why you're considering this drive to Montana? One last adventure before things change?" Her perception startled him. "Maybe. Hadn't thought of it that way." "What will you do when the long drives end?" It was a question Yancey had avoided asking himself. "Don't know. Find work on a ranch somewhere, I suppose." "But not your own ranch," he shrugged uncomfortably. "That dream died with this," he said, gesturing to his scarred face. Josie frowned. "I don't understand the connection. A man with plans for the future needs a partner, a wife, can't expect a woman to tie herself to." He trailed off, embarrassed by his candor. "To a man with a scar," she finished, sounding incredulous. "Do you truly believe that's how women choose their husbands, based on the smoothness of their skin?" Put that way, it did sound ridiculous. "It's not just the scar, it's what it represents. Failure. I wasn't fast enough, smart enough to avoid that stampede." "That's nonsense," Josie said bluntly. "Accidents happen to everyone, Yancey. They're not a judgment on your character or abilities." Before he could respond, she pointed ahead. "Is that it?" They had crested a small rise, and below them lay a picturesque valley with a creek winding through it. A modest house stood near the water with a barn and corral nearby. The spring grass was lush and green, dotted with wildflowers. "That's Dawson Creek Ranch," Yancey confirmed. "Your father chose well." Josie's eyes were bright as she took in the scene. "It's beautiful, more than I expected." They rode down to the house, which was sturdy but simple, a one-story structure built of logs with a stone chimney. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, with a rocking chair still sitting as if waiting for its owner to return. Dismounting, Yancey helped Josie down from her horse, that same awareness passing between them as his hands circled her waist. This time, her hands lingered briefly on his shoulders before she stepped away. "Let me check the house first," he said, drawing his revolver. "Make sure no one's been using it." She nodded, staying with the horses while he approached the house cautiously. The door was locked, but Josie produced a key from her reticule. Inside, the house was dusty but undisturbed, a testament to the respect people had for Colonel Dawson. There were 4 rooms. A main living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, and 2 bedrooms at the back. "All clear," Yancey called, holstering his weapon as Josie entered. She walked through the house slowly, running her fingers over her father's possessions, books on a shelf, a military portrait on the wall, a desk in the corner with papers still neatly arranged. In the larger bedroom, she paused before a trunk at the foot of the bed. "He mentioned this in his last letter," she said softly. "Said there were things of my mother's he'd saved for me." Kneeling, she opened the trunk to reveal carefully preserved items: a wedding dress wrapped in muslin, jewelry boxes, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbons. Tears filled her eyes as she lifted out a small daguerreotype of a beautiful young woman who resembled Josie. "My mother," she explained, showing Yancey. "She died when I was 10. Fever." "You look like her," he observed gently. "Father always said so." She replaced the picture carefully and closed the trunk. "I'll go through everything later. For now, let's see the rest of the property." They explored the barn next, which housed tools, tack, and farm equipment, all in good repair. The corral was sturdy, and beyond it stretched acres of good grazing land. The creek that gave the ranch its name ran clear and strong along the western boundary of the property. "Your father was preparing for cattle," Yancey noted, pointing out the expanded corral and newly built loading chute. "Looks like he was planning to start a small herd." "He mentioned something about that in his letters," Josie remembered. "Said he was too old to start trailing cattle across the country but not too old to raise them properly." They returned to the house, where Yancey built a fire in the kitchen stove while Josie swept away the worst of the dust. They prepared a simple lunch from their supplies, eating at the small table by the kitchen window. "What do you think?" Yancey asked as they ate. "Will you sell it?" Josie looked around thoughtfully. "I came here intending to. My life is in Philadelphia, my work, my friends, but now that I'm here." She sighed. "I understand why Father loved it so. There's something about this place that feels right. But you're a nurse. Not much call for that out here." "Actually, there's tremendous need. Mrs. Jenkins mentioned there's no doctor for 20 miles. People rely on folk remedies and whatever medical knowledge has been passed down." She looked out the window at the rolling landscape. "I could do good work here." "It's a hard life," Yancey warned. "Nothing like Philadelphia. I'm not afraid of hard work." She turned back to him. "But I know nothing about ranching. Running a cattle operation alone would be foolish. You could hire help." "Yes, but without knowledge of the business, I'd be at the mercy of whoever I hired." She studied him thoughtfully. "What would you do if this were your land?" The question caught him off guard. "Me?" "Yes, you know cattle, you know this country. If you had this land, what would you do with it?" Yancey considered the question seriously. "Start small. Maybe 50 head to begin with. Good stock, not just any scrub cattle. Build the herd carefully over time. This land could support several hundred head eventually. And it would be profitable, with proper management, yes. Beef prices are good and the railroad's not far. Getting stock to market is easier than it used to be." Josie nodded, seeming to come to a decision. "Would you consider staying on, helping me get started?" For a moment, Yancey couldn't speak. "What about Hollister's drive? I'm supposed to meet him today." "There will be other cattle drives," she said simply. "This is an opportunity to build something lasting, a partnership." "A partnership," he repeated, the word feeling strange on his tongue. "You and me, why not? You have the knowledge and experience. I have the land and the willingness to learn. We could split the profits." It was a tempting proposition, more tempting than Yancey wanted to admit. The chance to work his own operation, even as a partner, instead of driving someone else's cattle. But there was a complication Josie wasn't acknowledging. "People would talk," he said finally. "A woman alone, partnering with a man like me." "Let them talk," she replied with a dismissive wave. "I've never much cared for gossip. You should. Your reputation is my concern, not yours." She leaned forward. "Yancey, I'm offering a business arrangement that benefits us both. Nothing improper about it." He wasn't convinced, but the prospect of staying, of working this beautiful piece of land was almost irresistible. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course." She sat back. "I need to return to town anyway, speak with the bank about my father's accounts, get more supplies if I'm staying." "I'll escort you back," he offered. "Need to see Hollister either way." They cleaned up their lunch and secured the house before mounting up for the ride back to Fort Kearny. The ease between them remained, but Yancey's mind was turbulent with thoughts of Josie's offer and what it might mean. Back in town, Yancey accompanied Josie to the bank, where the manager, Herbert Mason, greeted her warmly. "Miss Dawson, we've been expecting you. Your father was a valued customer. My condolences on your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Mason. I'd like to discuss my father's accounts and any outstanding business matters." "Of course. Please come into my office." Mason eyed Yancey questioningly. "Mr. Irons has been kind enough to escort me to the property and back," Josie explained. "I've asked him to consider a business partnership regarding the ranch." Mason's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "I see. Would you like Mr. Irons to join us for this discussion?" Josie looked at Yancey questioningly. He shook his head. "I should find Hollister. We can discuss your proposition later, Miss Dawson." "Very well. Shall we meet for dinner to continue our conversation?" "I'll come by the hotel at 6, he agreed, tipping his hat to her before departing. Yancey found Tom Hollister at the saloon as expected. The trail boss was a grizzled veteran of dozens of cattle drives, with a reputation for delivering herds intact and on time. "Irons," Hollister called when Yancey entered. "Thought you might have changed your mind." "Got delayed," Yancey explained, joining the older man at his table. "How's the drive shaping up?" 2,000 head, good stock, heading for the Yellowstone country, Army contract. Hollister studied him shrewdly. "You still in? Pays good 80 a month plus a bonus if we deliver on schedule." It was a generous offer. 3 months' work would set Yancey up for the winter, but Josie's proposition lingered in his mind. "I might have another opportunity," he admitted. "Local." Hollister's eyebrows rose. "Ranch work, something like that. Partnership, actually." "With who?" "Last I heard, you weren't exactly flush with cash for buying into anything." "Colonel Dawson's daughter. She's inherited his place and needs someone who knows cattle." Hollister whistled low. "The nurse from back east, that's moving fast, Irons." "It's not like that," Yancey said sharply. "Strictly business." "Uh-huh." Hollister didn't look convinced. "Well, it's your choice. Drive leaves day after tomorrow. You decide you want in, you know where to find me." Yancey left the saloon more conflicted than ever. Josie's offer was tempting a chance at something he'd thought beyond his reach. But was it wise? Could he bear the inevitable gossip, the damage to her reputation? And what if his feelings for her continued to grow? The thought of living in close proximity, working together daily, was both exciting and terrifying. He spent the afternoon restlessly walking the town, weighing his options. By the time 6 o'clock approached, he still hadn't reached a decision. Returning to the hotel, he found Josie waiting in the lobby, dressed in a simple but elegant green dress that brought out the gold in her hair. "You look lovely," he said before he could stop himself. "Thank you," she replied with a smile. "I thought we might try the restaurant at the end of the street. Mrs. Jenkins recommended it." The restaurant was small but clean, with tablecloths and decent food, the best Fort Kearny had to offer. They were seated in a corner, away from most of the other diners, though Yancey was acutely aware of curious glances directed their way. "Did you speak with your trail boss?" Josie asked after they ordered. "Yes. Drive leaves day after tomorrow. 2,000 head heading to Montana Territory." "And have you decided whether to accept my proposition instead?" Yancey sighed. "It's complicated, Josie. Explain it to me." He struggled to put his concerns into words. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work in small towns like this. People talk. A woman alone, partnering with a man living on the same property. It would damage your reputation." "I'm 30 years old, Yancey. I nursed soldiers through a war. I've dealt with far worse than small-town gossip. It's different when it affects you directly. And what about you? She challenged. Are you concerned about the gossip, or is it something else? He hesitated, then decided on honesty. When I look at you, I don't just see a business partner. Color rose in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. I see, and that complicates matters, doesn't it? Perhaps. She took a sip of water, but it might also simplify them. Before he could ask what she meant, their food arrived. They ate in thoughtful silence for a few minutes before Josie spoke again. I visited the general store after the bank. Mrs. Jenkins introduced me to several people, including the town's only part-time doctor, a Dr. Wallace who visits from Junction City once a month. He was quite excited about the prospect of having a trained nurse nearby. So you're planning to stay, regardless of my decision? Yes, she said firmly. This is my home now. Father loved it here, and I understand why. There's work for me to do, people who need my skills, and the land. There's something about it that feels right. And the ranch. I still want to make a go of it, with or without your help, though I'd much prefer with. She looked at him directly. Yancey, I understand your concerns about my reputation, but I'm offering you a business partnership that could benefit us both. Whether there might someday be more between us is a separate matter entirely. Her directness both impressed and unsettled him. Most women wouldn't be so forthright. I'm not most women, she replied simply. I've seen too much, done too much to waste time on coyness and pretense. Life is short and often cruel. When you find something or someone worth taking a risk for, you should take it. Yancey considered her words carefully. She was right, this was a rare opportunity, personally and professionally, but the fear that had governed his life since the accident was hard to shake. I need one more night to think, he said finally. If I decide to accept your offer, what exactly would it entail? A true partnership, she said promptly. We'd start small, as you suggested. I have funds from my father's accounts plus my own savings from nursing. We'd split the profits equally. As for living arrangements, the house has 2 bedrooms, completely proper. The practicality of her approach almost made him smile. And when people talk, we ignore them, she said simply. Eventually, they'll find something more interesting to gossip about. After dinner, Yancey walked Josie back to the hotel. At the entrance, she turned to him with a serious expression. Whatever you decide, Yancey, I want you to know that these past 2 days have been enlightening. Meeting you has changed how I view my future here. How so? I came expecting to sell Father's property and return east. Instead, I've found a place I might belong, and a man who sees me clearly, not as a spinster nurse or an officer's daughter, but as myself. Her words touched something deep inside him. I'll have my answer in the morning, he promised. Either way, I'll help you get properly settled before I go if that's what I decide. Thank you. She hesitated, then stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek, the scarred one. Good night, Yancey. He watched her enter the hotel, his skin tingling where her lips had touched his scar. No one had willingly touched it since the doctor who'd stitched him up 7 years ago. The gesture moved him more than he could express. Yancey spent a restless night in the livery loft, his mind churning with possibilities. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He rose early, washed, and put on his cleanest shirt before heading to the hotel. Josie was already in the dining room having breakfast. Good morning, she greeted him, her expression curious but composed. Would you care to join me? Just coffee, he said, taking the seat across from her. He waited until the waitress had poured his cup and moved away before speaking again. I've been thinking about your offer, he began, cradling the hot cup between his hands. It's a good one. Better than I deserve, maybe. I disagree, she said mildly, but go on. The thing is, Josie, I haven't allowed myself to want things for a long time. Not since this, he gestured to his face. Figured it was easier not to hope than to be disappointed. She remained silent, letting him find his words. But meeting you, it's made me remember what hope feels like. He took a deep breath. I'd like to accept your offer. A true partnership will build something worth having on your father's land. The smile that lit her face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. I'm glad, she said simply. There's one condition, he added. We do this proper. Legal paperwork at the bank, everything above board. No room for gossip about impropriety. Of course, she agreed readily. We can speak with Mr. Mason this morning. They finished breakfast and headed to the bank, where Herbert Mason helped them draw up a formal partnership agreement for the development and operation of Dawson Creek Ranch. The document specified their equal investment, Josie's land and capital, Yancey's expertise and labor, and an equal division of profits. This all seems in order, Mason said, looking over the completed document. Though I must say, Miss Dawson, this is an unusual arrangement. Progress often begins with unusual arrangements, Mr. Mason, Josie replied pleasantly but firmly. My father taught me to recognize opportunity when it presents itself. Mr. Irons is the most knowledgeable cattleman I've met, and I'm fortunate that he's willing to enter into this partnership. Mason couldn't argue with her logic, though his expression suggested he had reservations. Nevertheless, he witnessed their signatures and made the partnership official. Their next stop was the general store, where they purchased supplies for the ranch food staples, tools, seed for a kitchen garden, and other necessities. Martha Jenkins was delighted to hear of their partnership. The Colonel would be pleased, she assured Josie. He always spoke highly of Mr. Irons' character and knowledge of cattle. Yancey was surprised by this information. You knew the Colonel well, Mrs. Jenkins. Oh, yes. He was a regular customer, of course, but also a friend. My husband served under him during the war. Martha smiled at Josie. He showed me your letters, you know. Very proud of your nursing work. Said you had your mother's healing touch and his own stubborn determination. Tears welled in Josie's eyes. Thank you for telling me that. They arranged for their supplies to be delivered to the ranch the following day, then visited the livery to inform Sam of Yancey's decision. Can't say I'm surprised, Sam said with a knowing grin. It's about time you put down roots, Yancey. And you couldn't ask for a finer partner than Miss Dawson here. I need to tell Hollister I won't be joining the drive, Yancey said. Have you seen him this morning? He's over at the cattle pens, inspecting stock. Said to tell you to find him there if you came by. Josie accompanied Yancey to the cattle pens on the outskirts of town, where Hollister was overseeing the counting of a small herd. Irons, the trail boss, greeted him. Made your decision, I see. He nodded respectfully to Josie. Miss Dawson, I presume, your father was a good man. Thank you, Mr. Hollister. I've heard you're an excellent trail boss. Try to be, he said modestly. But it seems I'll be short one good hand this drive. I'm staying, Yancey confirmed. Miss Dawson and I have formed a partnership to develop her father's ranch. Hollister studied them both, then nodded slowly. Can't say I blame you. Opportunity like that doesn't come along often. He extended his hand to Yancey. Good luck to you both. Cattle business is changing. Smart to get established now. I appreciate the understanding, Yancey said, shaking the older man's hand. Just remember what I taught you about breeding stock, Hollister advised. Quality over quantity every time. I'll remember. They parted on good terms, with Hollister promising to stop by the ranch on his return journey to see how they were progressing. By midday, Yancey and Josie were ready to return to the ranch. As they rode out of town, Yancey felt a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement. For the first time in 7 years, He was allowing himself to hope for something more than mere survival. He was building a future. The ranch looked different somehow as they approached it, this time more like a beginning than an ending. They stabled their horses and carried their personal belongings into the house. Josie had purchased fresh linens for both bedrooms, and they worked together to make the place more habitable, cleaning away dust and opening windows to let in the spring air. By evening, the house felt lived in again. They prepared a simple supper together and ate at the kitchen table, discussing plans for the ranch. "We'll need to purchase cattle soon," Yancey said. "There's a stock auction in Junction City next week. We could find good breeding stock there. How many should we start with?" 50 head would be manageable for the two of us, with maybe a hired hand for busy times. We'll want mostly cows and a few good bulls to start building the herd. Josie nodded, making notes in a small ledger. "And what about improvements to the property?" "The barn and corral are solid, but we'll need to repair some fencing on the north section. Might want to build a smokehouse eventually and expand the garden." They talked late into the evening, planning their future together as business partners at least. But Yancey couldn't help noticing how naturally they worked together, how their different strengths complemented each other. Josie was practical, organized, and unafraid of hard work. He found himself admiring her more with each passing hour. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. They purchased their first small herd at the Junction City auction, 45 cows and 5 bulls, all healthy stock with good bloodlines. Yancey hired a local boy, 16-year-old Timothy Porter, to help with the daily chores. The son of a neighboring farmer, Tim was eager to learn the cattle business and proved to be a quick study. Word spread quickly about the unusual arrangement at Dawson Creek Ranch. Some neighbors were openly curious, others more reticent. But Josie's medical skills soon won over even the most skeptical. When she successfully treated the Maxwell family's youngest child for a high fever that had the local midwife baffled, her position in the community was secured. Yancey found himself slowly emerging from the shell he'd built around himself since the accident. Working alongside Josie daily, seeing her acceptance of him scar, and all gradually began to heal something deep inside him. He still caught himself turning his scarred side away from strangers out of habit, but with Josie, he never felt the need to hide. One evening, about a month after they'd established the ranch, they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Josie had been quiet all day, seemingly lost in thought. "Everything all right?" Yancey asked finally. "Just thinking about Father," she admitted. "Today would have been his birthday." "Tell me about him," Yancey encouraged. "I only knew him as Colonel Dawson, the fair-minded officer who let trail hands water their cattle at his creek." Josie smiled at the memory. "He was a good man, strict but fair. After Mother died, he raised me alone, carting me from one army post to another until I was old enough for boarding school. Must have been hard on you both." "It was, but we managed. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to stand up for myself." Her smile turned sad. "When I told him I wanted to be a nurse, he was disappointed at first. Thought I'd marry some officer and give him grandchildren. But when the war came and he saw the work I was doing, he was so proud." "He had reason to be," Yancey said softly. "You have healing hands." She looked at him curiously. "What about your family? You've never mentioned them." Yancey was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Not much to tell. Father was a blacksmith in Missouri, died when I was 14. Mother remarried a year later a man who didn't much want another man's son around. I left home at 16, found work with a cattle outfit heading to Texas." "You've been on your own a long time," she observed. "By choice, mostly." He hesitated, then added, "After the accident, I pushed away what few friends I had, Figured it was easier that way. Easier for whom? For everyone, he said, but even to his own ears it sounded hollow. Yancey, she said gently, that scar changed how you look, not who you are. The people who matter know that. Like you. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Yes, she said simply. Like me. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something that had been building since that first rain-soaked meeting in the abandoned barn. Yancey wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her how she'd changed his life in just a few short weeks, but fear held him back. Their partnership was working well. Why risk complicating it? The moment passed and Josie stood, smoothing her skirts. It's getting late. I should turn in. We have an early start tomorrow. Good night, Josie, he said softly. Good night, Yancey. He remained on the porch long after she'd gone inside, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to want something he'd thought forever beyond his reach, not just a partnership, but a true sharing of lives. The summer brought long, busy days as they established their operation. The cattle thrived on the rich grass, and several calves were born, the first of what they hoped would be many. Josie proved to be a natural with the animals, unafraid and instinctively gentle. She took to ranch life with surprising ease, adapting her practical nursing skills to the demands of animal husbandry. Yancey found himself watching her with growing admiration, the way she faced each new challenge head-on, her quiet competence, her unfailing kindness. More than once, he caught her looking at him with an expression that made his heart beat faster, but neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge the changing nature of their feelings. Their partnership became the talk of the county, not always favorably. When Josie rode into town alone one day to purchase supplies, she overheard two women gossiping about her at the general store. Living out there with a man, not even married, one whispered loudly enough to be heard. And him with that hideous face. What kind of woman would? The kind who recognizes a good man when she sees one, Josie interrupted coolly, facing the startled women. Mr. Irons is my business partner and a man of impeccable character. I suggest you direct your concern toward actual impropriety rather than inventing it where none exists. Martha Jenkins, witnessing the exchange, hurried over. Miss Dawson is right, ladies. Colonel Dawson would be proud of how his daughter is managing his legacy. And Mr. Irons is respected by everyone whose opinion matters. The women retreated, abashed, but Josie knew the gossip would continue. She didn't mention the incident to Yancey, not wanting to add to his self-consciousness about his scar. As summer progressed toward autumn, the partnership flourished. Their small herd grew, and Dawson Creek Ranch began to develop a reputation for quality stock. Josie's nursing practice expanded as well, with people coming from miles around for treatment. One stormy night in late September, they were awakened by frantic pounding on the door. Yancey reached it first, opening it to reveal a drenched and desperate-looking man. "Please help," he gasped. "My wife's having the baby. Something's wrong." "Doc Wallace is away and they said you were a nurse, madam." Josie was already pulling on her robe. "How far away is your home, Mr. Crawford?" "James Crawford, about 3 miles north. Please hurry." "I'll saddle the horses," Yancey said, already reaching for his boots. "No need for both of you to come out in this weather," Josie protested. "I'm not letting you ride out alone in a storm," Yancey said firmly. No argument. 20 minutes later, they were riding through the driving rain toward the Crawford homestead, following the frantic husband. They arrived to find a small cabin where a young woman lay in the bedroom, clearly in distress, attended by an older woman who introduced herself as a neighbor. "The baby's turned wrong," the neighbor whispered to Josie. "Been laboring since yesterday morning." Josie went to work immediately, examining the mother with gentle, capable hands. "The baby is breech," she confirmed. "I'll need to turn it. Mr. Crawford, please wait outside with Mr. Irons. Mrs. Hodges, I'll need your assistance." Yancey and James Crawford retreated to the main room of the cabin, where they built up the fire and waited anxiously. Through the closed door, they could hear occasional cries of pain followed by Josie's calm, reassuring voice. "Your wife," Crawford said after a long silence. "She's good at this sort of thing. She's not my wife," Yancey corrected automatically. "We're partners, and yes, she's the best I've ever seen, trained during the war." Crawford studied him curiously. "Folks in town talk, about you two living out there together." Yancey stiffened. "Nothing improper about it. Legal business partnership." "Didn't mean any offense," Crawford said quickly. "Just seems to me a man and woman who work that well together might be more to it than business." Before Yancey could respond, a new sound cut through the storm, the thin, outraged cry of a newborn. Both men jumped to their feet, and moments later, Mrs. Hodges opened the bedroom door, beaming. "A boy," she announced. "Healthy as can be, despite the trouble." "Your wife's a miracle worker, Mr. Irons." "She's not Yancey began, but stopped as Josie appeared in the doorway, holding a small bundle wrapped in a clean blanket. "Would you like to meet your son, Mr. Crawford?" she asked, her face glowing despite her obvious exhaustion. Crawford approached reverently, taking the tiny infant in his arms with wonder. "Sarah," he asked anxiously. "Your wife is fine," Josie assured him. "Tired but recovering well. You can see her now." As Crawford disappeared into the bedroom with his son, Josie sagged slightly. Yancey moved to her side, supporting her elbow. "You need to sit down," he said gently. "You're exhausted." She didn't argue, allowing him to guide her to a chair by the fire. "It was close," she admitted quietly. "The cord was wrapped around his neck, but they're both going to be fine now." "You saved them," Yancey said, admiration clear in his voice. "Like you said about my scar, proof of survival." She smiled tiredly. "I suppose so." They stayed until dawn, ensuring that mother and baby were stable. As they prepared to leave, Sarah Crawford reached for Josie's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "James and I want to name him after your husband, if that's all right." Josie blushed. "Mr. Irons isn't my husband, we're business partners." Sarah looked confused, glancing between them. "Oh, I just assumed, the way he watched over you all night." "What will you name him?" Yancey asked quickly, changing the subject. "We were thinking Yancey James Crawford," Sarah said. "If that's acceptable to you, sir." Yancey was stunned. No one had ever honored him in such a way. "I'd be honored, madam, truly." The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world sparkling in the early morning sunlight. When they reached the ranch, Yancey helped Josie from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. "You should rest," he said. "I'll handle the chores today." "I'm not that fragile," she protested, though her eyes were heavy with exhaustion. "Never said you were, but you've been up all night saving lives. Rest is earned." She smiled, too tired to argue further. "Wake me for dinner." "Count on it." As Josie slept, Yancey worked through the day with a new sense of purpose. The Crawfords' assumption that they were married had stirred something in him, not embarrassment, as it might have once, but a quiet longing. He found himself imagining a future where it wasn't just a mistake, but reality. By the time he prepared dinner, a simple stew with biscuits he'd learned to make passably well, he'd reached a decision. When Josie joined him, looking refreshed after her rest, he found himself studying her face, memorizing every detail. "What is it?" she asked, noticing his scrutiny. "Do I have flour on my nose?" "No," he said softly. "I was just thinking how lucky I am that you found shelter in that barn during the storm." she smiled. I was thinking the same thing earlier, how different my life would be if I hadn't met you that night. Josie, he began, then hesitated. The Crawfords thinking we were married. Did that bother you? She considered the question seriously. No, she said finally. It felt natural somehow, as if they were seeing something we haven't acknowledged ourselves. Yancey's heart began to pound. And what might that be? That perhaps our partnership has become more than just a business arrangement, she said softly. At least for me it has. For me too, he admitted, the words feeling like a weight lifting from his chest. I've been afraid to say anything, afraid to want more. Because of the scar, partly. And because what we have worked so well, I didn't want to risk it. Josie reached across the table and took his hand. Some risks are worth taking, Yancey. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm beginning to believe that. Their eyes met, and the unspoken feelings between them finally found expression in their gazes. Yancey stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Her response was immediate and wholehearted, her arms sliding around his neck as she returned the kiss with a warmth that banished the last of his doubts. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yancey rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for a very long time, he confessed. What took you so long? She teased gently. Fear, he admitted. Old habits. And now I'm tired of letting fear decide my fate. He cupped her face in his hands. I love you, Josephine Dawson. I think I have since that first night in the barn when you looked at my scar and saw survival instead of failure. I love you too, she said simply. The man beneath the scar, the man who's helped me build this life I never knew I wanted until I found it. They sealed their declaration with another kiss, this one deeper and more certain. The future stretched before them not without challenges, but full of promise. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the community. Most were supportive, especially those who had benefited from Josie's medical skills or Yancey's expertise with cattle. Others were surprised but accepting. A few disapproved, but their opinions mattered little to the couple. They were married on a crisp October day, with the autumn leaves painting the landscape in gold and crimson. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with Martha Jenkins and her husband, Sam Winters, and his wife, young Timothy Porter, and even Tom Hollister, passing through on his way back from Montana in attendance. The Crawfords came too, bringing little Yancey James, now a thriving month-old baby. Josie wore a simple white dress, and Yancey stood tall and proud beside her, no longer trying to hide his scarred face. As they spoke their vows, he thought of how far he'd come from that rain-soaked night when he tried to hide in the shadows of an abandoned barn. Their honeymoon was brief, just 3 days in Junction City, as the ranch couldn't be left for long. But neither minded. They were building their life together with each passing day. Winter came, bringing snow and cold winds, but the ranch house was warm and filled with love. They expanded the cattle operation gradually, reinvesting profits and building a reputation for quality. Josie's medical practice continued to grow, and she began teaching basic medical skills to interested women in the area. By spring, they had news of their own to share. Josie was expecting their first child. The pregnancy didn't slow her down much, though Yancey fussed over her constantly, much to her amused exasperation. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she reminded him one day as he tried to prevent her from lifting a bucket of water. Humor me, he replied, kissing her lightly. I've got a lot of lost time to make up for. What do you mean? 7 years of hiding from life because of this, he touched his scar. 7 years I could have been building something, maybe even with you if our paths had crossed sooner. We can't change the past, she said wisely, but we have now and the future, speaking of which. She guided his hand to her rounded belly, where their child had just delivered a strong kick. Yancey's face transformed with wonder. Strong like its mother, he murmured, and stubborn like its father, she teased. Their daughter, Elizabeth Catherine Irons, was born on a beautiful summer day with Dr. Wallace in attendance. She had her mother's golden hair and, to Yancey's delight, his own deep blue eyes. As he held his daughter for the first time, Yancey marveled at how completely his life had changed in just over a year. "She's perfect," he whispered, gazing down at the tiny face. "Yes, she is," Josie agreed, watching her husband and daughter with love. "And so are you, Yancey Irons, scar and all." He met her eyes, his own damp with emotion. "You taught me that this," he touched his scarred cheek, "is proof I survived. But you, Josie, you're the reason I'm finally living." 5 years passed and Dawson Creek Ranch flourished. Their herd grew to over 300 head, and they employed several full-time hands. Josie's medical practice became official when she partnered with Dr. Wallace to establish a proper clinic in Fort Kearney, dividing her time between nursing and ranching. Little Elizabeth, now 5, was joined by 3-year-old James Yancey, and Josie was expecting their 3rd child. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a dedicated examination room for Josie's patients who couldn't make it to town. On the anniversary of their first meeting, they made a tradition of visiting the old barn where they'd sheltered from the storm. Now repaired and part of their expanded operation, it still held special meaning for them. "Do you ever wonder," Josie asked as they stood in the spot where they'd first laid eyes on each other, "what would have happened if it hadn't rained that night, if we'd never met?" Yancey considered the question, his arm around her waist, his free hand resting on her rounded belly where their 3rd child grew. "I'd probably still be drifting, taking whatever cattle work I could find, hiding my face, existing, not living. And I might have sold the ranch and gone back east," she mused, "never knowing what I was missing." "Then I'm grateful for that storm," he said, turning her gently to face him. The scar that had once been his shame was now simply a part of him, neither hidden nor emphasized. And for a woman brave enough to tell a stranger that his worst feature was actually proof of his strength. "I only spoke the truth," Josie said, reaching up to trace the now familiar line from his temple to his jaw. "This scar led you to me. How could I ever see it as anything but a blessing?" Yancey leaned down to kiss her, still marveling after all this time that she had chosen him, scars and all. Their life wasn't perfect. Ranching was hard work, full of challenges and setbacks, but it was rich with purpose and love. As they walked hand in hand back to their home, where their children waited with Martha Jenkins, who had become like a grandmother to them, Yancey reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From a lonely, scarred cowboy hiding from the world to a husband, father, and respected rancher, all because one woman had seen beyond his physical mark to the man beneath. "What are you thinking?" Josie asked, noting his thoughtful expression. "That scars don't define us," he replied. "It's what we build despite them that matters." "Wise words, Mr. Irons," she said with a smile. "I learned from the best, Mrs. Irons," he replied, his heart full as they walked toward their future together.